welcome in the legendary artists on the program today from the Moody Blues and Wings. We welcome in the legendary Denny Laine. Denny, Brian C., it's an honor to speak with you.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Very well, Denny. Denny, you have been performing for over 6 decades. What can you tell us inspired you on becoming a musician?
Well, it's a long story or a short story, but the short story is that I grew up in a musical type family. So, you know, I went into music in school. I went into bands in school and decided to turn professional when I was about 7, like that.
At 7 years old, you began playing an instrument, huh?
Yeah, well, yeah, I suppose. I mean, I did my first live performance as a solo artist when I was 12.
Now, Denny, can you share with us and my audience here how the band, the Moody Blues, formed and how the band members all got together and put the group together?
Yeah, I had a band in Birmingham called the Diplomats, and actually the drummer was Bevan from ELO. And so they didn't want to turn professional. They all had jobs. So that was it. I wanted to turn professional and move to London because of the music scene down there. And the 2 guys from the Moody Blues, Ray Thomas and Michael Pinder, came back from Germany where they'd been seeing all the English bands playing out there. And they asked me to join, to go back to Germany. So I joined, but we didn't go to Germany. We got discovered and taken down to London. And then we did the Chuck Berry tour. And our song went up to #1, so there you go. That was the basic start of it all.
Right, and the two songs that come to my mind is "Go Now" and "Nights in White Satin." Can you tell us a little bit about how both of those songs originated and were created?
Well, I wasn't on "Nights in White Satin," so you know, all I know is that "Go Now" was a piano song. We had a piano in the band. Mike Pinder picked it, I think. And it was very gospel-y, very slow the way we heard it originally, and we adapted it to our style. Nights in White Satin, in actual fact, is very similar in design to a lot of the early Moody stuff that we were writing anyway. The band had a sound, it had a style. And Nights in White Satin, the end of Nights in White Satin especially, is very, very similar to the end of one of the songs we had called The Bottom of My Heart. So, you know, it progressed from my lineup to their lineup very easily. The band was already doing that sort of stuff before Justin came. So, you know, it was kind of a good transition. I'm really glad that they went on to be successful as well, because I'd have felt bad leaving if they hadn't. So, there you go.
Yeah, and I saw some interviews in which you did, and you talked about some of those early Moody Blue parties. Can you talk a little bit about those parties and who attended those events? Well,
let's put it this way: if a bomb had gone off in that house, there wouldn't be a music business. So
there was a lot of talent in that room.
Yeah, that's an old saying, but. Yeah, we, you know, whoever was in town at that particular weekend when we were not working, we'd go down the clubs and we would invite people over. And we'd say, you know, call people. I didn't do a lot of the inviting. Mike used to do it, and Ray. But so anyway, we would have these big parties and they would last for 2 or 3 days over the weekends. And, you know, all the Beatles, Brian Epstein, people like that. The Stones, Tom Jones, to name a few. You know, a lot of people came, the Animals. But these were people we knew from the clubs. We'd already been going to. There's music clubs, you know, and we even had our names on the seats we were sitting in at this particular club, which was next door to where John Lennon met Yoko Ono, by the way. And we would have these parties. So there would just be really get-togethers for people to get to know each other, really, and they're very popular at the time. So that's how we got to know a lot more people, you know, that we did. We played a lot of the celebrity shows in London and stuff like that. We were on stage with people like Eric Clapton and the Yardbirds and Rod Stewart, Jeff Beck. We used to play a lot of gigs with these people. Whoever was available would come to our parties.
We're talking to the legendary Denny Laine. Denny, is it true that you weren't really a fan of the Beatles? They were more of a rival with the Moody Blues. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Well, friendly rival. You know,
A friendly rival.
You got to remember that the Beatles were our friends. We when we first went down to London, we met them in a club, and from that day on, we were visiting them. They would come to our house. They would come and play us their latest acetate, you know, that they'd just recorded in EMI on the way out of town. They'd drop by and play it to us. So we weren't rivals in that sense. And I was definitely I don't like the word fan too much, but because we were in a band, so we weren't like, you know, fans too much. But we did, obviously, we were very, very respectful of what they were doing. We loved the music, and of course we were all a little bit jealous about their fame. I mean, that's the way it is. And so everybody's kind of striving to get to that level, but if it hadn't been for the Beatles, there probably wouldn't have been a British music scene at all. Although there was a huge British music scene before the Beatles got popular, you know. I mean, I'm just saying, I don't think we would have all got as famous if it hadn't been for them. So, you know, and we did their second British tour as well. We were on that tour with them, simply because, you know, I was friendly with, especially George and Paul. Those are the two I used to go out with a lot to see American bands that came over. So it was kind of a friendly stuff. But we were very respectful of the music, for sure.
Now, I read early in your career, Denny, that your band, I believe it was the Diplomats, they were one of the first bands to have a piano on stage.
It was the Moody Blues that had the piano.
Okay, so that was one of the first bands to at that era to have a piano on stage.
It wasn't the first band. There was lots of bands, but they just didn't get as famous, you know. So, I mean, there were bands that used pianos on stage. The problem with using the piano on stage, there was no electric pianos as such. So people didn't want to, you know, go to gigs and have to play. Some places didn't have pianos, and a lot of them were out of tune as well. But Mike was a piano player, so we did play piano. In actual fact, it was Mike Pinder and Roland Corporation that invented the synthesizer. So that they could be used on stage. So anyway, we had this sound. We were known for it, and there were a couple of other ones, but they just didn't have the same success. That's all.
Now, you had an early solo career with the formation of Electric String Band. Why did you leave the Moody Blues?
I suppose it was an age thing. I was young. I was always, you know, I was always pretty bit of a gypsy, you know, and I always wanted to do different things, and they wanted to stay on the road and just work the road all the time. And I said we should go in the studio. We owe Decca another album, and we should be writing and doing that. And so they wanted to just continue. And I said, well, I'm going to go off and write some songs and see what happens. And then I eventually kind of drifted away and did my own thing and formed my own band. Denny Cordell was a friend of mine who produced the album with the Moody Blues. So he brought in a guy called Tony Visconti, who's a big producer now, he did David Bowie, Mos Bolan, all those people. And so we went our own direction. And I had a little bit of a minor hit with a song called Say You Don't Mind in the Electric String Band. And then Colin Blunstone had a huge hit with it, Colin from the Zombies. And so I did that for about a year. Last show I did was the Jimi Hendrix show.
And, you did?
Yeah, and John and Paul were in the audience. And that kind of got Paul to think about me when he wanted to put a band together. So he called me later, and, a few months later, and we did it. But it was after Ginger Baker's Air Force, actually. But we did it, and because we knew each other. We were friends.
Well, speaking about Jimi Hendrix, you were a big Chuck Berry fan. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. Well, everybody was in those days. But you have to understand that most of the people, like me, including Eric Clapton, including George, and Keith Richards, we're all Chuck Berry fans because and Buddy Holly fans, actually, because they were the first singer-songwriters. You know, they used to play guitar, and we were guitarists and singers, so that we were more attracted to them. You know, there's Elvis and Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis, but we were more attracted to the songwriters and guitar players, so that's why we were big fans of his.
We're talking to the legendary Denny Laine. Denny, let's talk about joining Wings. You said you had a relationship with the Beatles. You got the call from Paul McCartney, and he says, "What are you doing?" You said nothing. He said, "Come on down." Is that the way it worked?
That is exactly the way it works. And I was on a plane to Scotland the next day, and Denny Sywell was already there because he played on the album Ram, Paul's album. So he was still already up in Scotland, and it was just, I got there and we started jamming. Actually, I stayed in Paul's garage on a mattress, and we just stayed and played every day. You know, we just kept playing all the old stuff that we all knew. I mean, we all grew up on the same music, so we just jammed away until we got good at it. And, you know, then he started writing some songs, and then we moved on to bigger things. But really, Scotland, every year we would go to Scotland for at least a month or two, just to get away from everything and start, you know, writing and just to keep out the public eye. He wanted to stay out the public eye, stay away from the press. So, you know, we just took that time to get rehearsed and to have that peace and quiet.
What would you say was the big difference playing with Wings versus the Moody Blues?
Well, I mean, the thing is, in the Moody Blues, we all came down from Birmingham together, like the Beatles came from Liverpool. We grew up in the same environments. We were part of that scene. We were a blues band also. So we started out as a blues band and crossed over into R&B, whereas the Beatles were really more R&B that crossed over into writing their own songs. Now, I did write some songs in the Moody Blues too. So I was starting my writing, you know, career, if you like, at that time. But Wings was just mainly, Paul was obviously the main man. He was most famous. He was much more prolific a writer than I was. I was younger than him, and he was running the whole show in many ways. But in the studio, we were very much equals in that sense. So, I mean, that's what he wanted me for. He wanted somebody he knew who wouldn't, you know, be, you know, I mean, I looked up to him, but I was definitely his equal when it came to ideas and musical stuff like that. But him and Linda took care of the other side of it. So they were like running the band in that sense.
Well, from what I read, I know Paul preferred working in the studio, and you preferred doing live shows. Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say, because those were the circumstances. Paul was, you know, probably the most famous person in the music business at that time. So he was getting, you know, there's a lot of pressure on him being on the road all the time. It was tiring. Although he loves it, and he loves his fans, and he's very appreciative, you know, he wanted to spend a lot of time. Well, it was the same in the Beatles. Towards the end of the Beatles, the reason they broke up was because of all that, you know, that adoration, and just they couldn't even get to play. I mean, they were just, you know, being screamed at, and they went in the studio, and that's how they came up with all those other great albums in the early days. And same with us. And he also lives around the corner from me in my studios. And so, you know, he spent a lot more time in the studios than the others, in fact. And then with Wings, he just continued that. And so we spent a lot of time in the studio. I learned a lot. I played a lot of different instruments. And I was really enjoying that side of it. But we weren't going on the road enough. So I was always the one saying, well, come on, let's do it. Let's go on the road. And we did. And we started in universities, and then we got to Europe and started playing big, you know, open venues and stuff like that, like amphitheaters and the bigger venues, and then and theaters, and then we went on to as we got bigger, we went on to these stadiums. So, yeah, it was completely a whole other world, really.
Well, Denny, I want to ask you, there'll never be another John Lennon, but do you feel that Paul forming Wings was looking to collaborate with another Lennon-ish figure, and he looked to you to join the band to assist with that?
Yes, would be the answer to that. But
yes,
he wasn't as, you got to remember, they grew up together too. So Paul wasn't as sure about the fact that I was, a prolific songwriter. I mean, I only just started, but that first Moody Blues album, I was writing a lot of stuff on that. So he knew about that. And so he wanted someone, to take over John's role, and that's why he would, although he would still write a lot of stuff himself, and so would I, separately. We specifically got together for writing sessions, and just to start from fresh with ideas and finish with a song. So it's the same principle. And again, we grew up on the same music. We had the same sense of humor. We enjoyed being in the country and all that to get away from the craziness of fame. And we just worked on. Well, it wasn't like work. It was just more like fun. We just worked to write as many things. Or I would help him a lot with his stuff, but he really knew that he had to be something separate from the Beatles, and the same with me as the Moody Blues. That we didn't want to do Moody Blues stuff on stage, or we didn't want to do, his hits either. I mean, Moody's didn't really have any hits. We had small hits, and then we had one big hit, which we did do on stage. We did do it, but he didn't want to do Beatles songs on stage, and I don't blame him. I wouldn't have wanted to be in the band if he was going to be a Beatle still. So there you go. So we started afresh, and I definitely helped him in that way.
Well, you helped them in a big way because Wings had only one fewer #1 singles in the United States, Denny, than Lennon, Harrison, Ringo Starr combined after their Beatle life.
Right. Well,
so it's.
I mean, you got to remember though that John really wasn't working that much. You have to go on the road to promote yourself anyway. And Paul was on the road. People were seeing him all the time, so they were going out. Anybody who came to them gigs, those big shows, would go out and buy records. And that's what we did with the Moody Blues, a Chuck Berry tour. That got us, live audience would go out and buy the records. So you have to promote your records by playing live, That's really what it's all about. But, I mean, the Beatles were big enough at that time when they did Sgt. Pepper and Rubber Soul and things like that. They were selling albums big time, but at the time, Wings, people had to be on the road to go out and get all those record sales as well. So it's part of the same, promotional thing. John didn't. Neither did George. They weren't going on the road. So there you go. I mean, John put together the Plastic Ono Band to do that, but he never really got it off the ground that much.
And speaking about Lennon, if I may ask you a couple of questions, Denny, about Lennon. Where were you that tragic day of Lennon's death, December 1980?
Well, I was in the studio. Paul wanted to go in the studio because he wanted to sort of have somebody to sit and talk with, I suppose. I mean, he was at home when he found out. Oh, it was the night before, I believe. So, whatever, I suppose we would hear about it like it was late at night when John got shot. So we would hear about it in the morning, early morning. And he wanted to come in the studio just to get his head away from it as much as he could. And we just kind of talked all day. We didn't work. But because John was a friend of mine too, to a certain degree. So, we just kind of talked about things and I think it's, I think work was the best therapy for him at that time, to just keep going forward, and that's what he did.
And you were as close to Paul as anyone, Denny. And I wanted to ask you this question. Back when that tragic event happened, there were reports saying that McCartney didn't really show emotion. What can you tell us on how McCartney's reaction, you know, what he relayed to you? How is his reaction speaking about Lennon's death to you?
Well, I mean, he was completely like in shock. And he always said to me, he started off by saying, you know, I wish we hadn't gone through that bad stuff, you know, that suing and falling out and whatever. I mean, they finally did get to be friends towards the end, which is great, thank God. But, you know, he regretted some of the bad things. And I think you always feel a certain amount of guilt when something like that happens. In anybody's going to go through that. And he felt a lot of guilt to a degree. That, you know, because they were getting to be quite friendly again. So, just before it happened. And then, so mainly, you know, we would talk about all the memories that we shared, if you like. And he would tell me things about John. And he really, you know, it was like his best friend in some ways. They spent the most time together in the Beatles. You got to remember that, writing and stuff. So he was completely like showing his emotions to me. I don't blame him. You know, he's in shock when people were, you know, kind of approaching him about John's death, and he didn't want to talk about it. And he's one of those guys who doesn't. I'm the same. I don't like to show too much emotion in public either. I mean, private stuff. Private feelings, how can you? It's not something you can really talk about like it's doing an interview. I mean, so he just, you know, basically clammed up. But in private, he's a very, you know, sensitive, emotional person, as we all are. I mean, you've got to be. To play music, you've got to have that in your character anyway. Paul is just one of those guys that's good with the public as much as he can be. And in this particular instance, he was in shock. Oh, you can't blame him for that.
Well, one thing for sure, Lennon's spirit still lives on with us. Denny, I wanted to play a couple of cuts of your songs. Is that okay? Can we do that?
Sure, absolutely.
Sean, can we play Denny Laine?
We've already said goodbye. Since you gotta go, you better go now. Go now, go now, go now. Before you see me cry. I don't want you to tell me just what you intend to do now. How many times I've tell you, darling, I'm still in love with you now. Whoa. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life you were only waiting for this moment to arrive. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see. All your life you were only waiting for this moment to be free. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly into the light of the dark black night.
Denny, fabulous material there, and they're telling me I have 30 seconds left.
Well,
you know, it was an honor to speak with you. You've been very generous with your time.
thank you. Well, but anyway, thanks a lot. That's I enjoyed it. It's a great little talk we had.
Well, thank you so much, and hopefully we could do it again. I have some more questions to ask you.
Okay, pal. Thanks very much.
All right, take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye. That was the legendary Hall of Famer, Denny Laine, joining the program, a legendary figure in the world of music. Until next week, happy collecting to all.